I was also experiencing fear, a lot of fear. Fear of not being able to work, fear of not being able to play tennis, fear of never getting back to lifting heavy weights in the gym, fear of not being able to do what was my favorite hobby at the time, DJing, and also fear of not getting back to Bikram yoga, which I really enjoyed. I was very fearful of not being able to do the things in life that brought me the most joy, but I also faced a potential crisis of identity. Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this week's episode, I'm going solo to discuss one of the biggest topics in the health arena, lower back pain. Lower back pain has been one of the most common reasons that clients come to see me for help over the last 22 years. And to highlight the size of this problem, here are some statistics on lower back pain from multiple sources. Lower back pain is the leading cause of long-term disability worldwide. The lifetime incidence of lower back pain is 54 to 84%, and 11% of men and 16% of women have chronic low back pain at any particular time. And chronic back pain, also known as persistent pain, means someone that's had long-term pain for at least 6 weeks or more. In the UK, back pain accounts for 7% of GP consultations and results in the loss of 4.1 million working days lost each year. More than 30% of people still have clinically significant symptoms beyond a year after onset of sciatica, which suggests to me that people aren't getting the right kind of help. Up to 60% of the adult population will have lower back pain at some point in their lifetime, and an Australian review states that non-specific lower back pain accounts for 90 to 95% of cases of lower back pain presenting to primary care. And non-specific means that there was no obvious cause, like a work or sporting incident or a road collision, for instance. A British study over 10 years found that the 1 year prevalence of lower back pain increased from 36 to 49%. And this trend was consistent across all ages in men and women in different socio-economic classes and across geographical regions. So we know the problem is getting continuously worse, so whatever solutions are being offered simply aren't working. A UK population-based cross-sectional study of adults aged 25 years or older found that the 1 month period prevalence of lower back pain was 28.5%, peaking at 41 to 50 years of age, and lower back pain was reported by 1 in 4 people aged over 80. The prevalence of lower back pain in 2017 was estimated to be about 7.5% of the global population, or around 577 million people. That's a lot of people. Lower back pain has been the leading cause of years lived with disability since 1990, and it remains a significant global health concern. 85 to 95% of people presenting to primary care providers do not have a specific identifiable pathoanatomical origin for their pain, which means they can't identify the exact tissues causing the pain, and often scans such as X-rays and MRIs do not show damage to specific tissues. So the person is in pain, but the cause is unknown. Disability associated with lower back pain increased in all age groups between 1990 and 2019, and was greatest in the 50 to 54 age group in 2019, and approximately 70% of years lost due to disability were in the working aged people between 20 and 65 years. Although the prevalence of lower back pain increases with age, the greatest number of people with lower back pain globally are currently in the 50 to 54 year age group. Studies in European countries indicate the total cost associated with lower back pain varies between 0.1 and 2% of gross domestic product. These are huge, huge numbers. However, the biggest cost in my view cannot be calculated, because how do you put a value on quality of life? That for me is the biggest detrimental effect of lower back pain, and why I'm so passionate to help people suffering with lower back pain. As you can see from those statistics, this is a huge problem affecting many people, which can cause devastation in those affected and the lives of those around them. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you my own experience of a serious lower back injury, which occurred 10 years ago and took the best part of 2 years to fully rehabilitate. It's important for me to share this story as I see many people suffer long term when in reality they don't need to. They just need the right information, education, and support. I hope you enjoy this episode. 10 years ago, I woke up one Thursday morning and I could feel my lower back was pretty sore and stiff. I hadn't done much the previous day, so I didn't think much of it and thought that, as I got out of bed and moved around, it would just loosen up, just as many aches and pains had done previously. After all, I was indestructible, right? Well, I attempted to get out of bed, but I was unable to sit up. As well as being in pain, I was a little confused as to why I couldn't sit up. And then I remembered an old trick from my cricketing days when I'd wake up on a Sunday morning after having bowled 30 plus overs the day before during the first game of the season, usually without an appropriate pre-season due to the football and cricket seasons often having a little overlap. And I'd be sore from head to toe, and the only way I could get out of bed was to roll sideways. At least this time, unlike in my cricketing days, I didn't have to get up stiff and bowl another 30 plus overs that day. So there was one benefit. So I tried to roll over, but even this was extremely sore and painful. Now I was starting to think that this was something perhaps a little more serious than just sore muscles. Then I remembered the previous week and weekend I'd been teaching a course at the Czech Institute, and I experienced stiffness and soreness around the region of my sacroiliac joints at the base of my spine. At the time, I put it down to, standing for long periods as I was teaching, and I thought after the course was over, I could stretch, rest, and mobilize, and I'd be just fine, just like many times before. The strange thing was, since the course finished, my lower back had felt okay. I finished the course on a Sunday, rested and took the day off on the Monday, went into work on Tuesday, and I performed a deadlift workout. Interestingly, I did abandon the workout because I felt sharp pain in my right knee during the lifts, and my intuition and the pain teacher were telling me I should stop and not continue. As you'll soon see, abandoning that workout was a very good decision. The no pain, no gain mentality there could have been very detrimental to me in that situation. So I was lying there in bed on the Thursday morning after doing no exercise the day before, and I couldn't move. I was in pain, and I was trying to decipher how I was going to get out of bed and stand up. In the end, I forced myself to roll sideways off the edge of the bed, which wasn't exactly pleasant, and I ended up face down on the floor next to my bed. At this point, I realized I had pain and numbness all the way down my left leg, all the way to my toes. Due to my training in lumbar spine pathology, I was aware of the different regions of dermatomes in my leg, and because I was aware of exactly where the numbness was located, I could guesstimate what nerves were being trapped in my spine. My guess was that my lumbar discs at the L4-5 and L5-S1 levels were protruding onto the nerves that exit the spine at those levels, which also supply nerves to the legs. It was only the left leg that was experiencing the pain and numbness, so that led me to suspect that the nerve occlusion was due to a disc bulge or bulges, because other causes of those symptoms are often bilateral, meaning affect both legs. Disc bulges are most often just on one side, which is why I was thinking it was a disc injury at that stage. So I'm lying face down in my bedroom, and I thought, well, it's just a couple of bulging discs. I know how to centralize the discs. I've helped many people to centralize bulging discs before. So whilst on the floor, I started performing McKenzie press-ups, which if you've never seen it before, it's like doing a normal press-up, but your legs and pelvis stay in contact with the ground. It's also a little bit similar, but not exactly the same as doing the cobra pose in yoga. The McKenzie press-ups help to push the discs anteriorly and away from the spinal cord and the spinal nerve roots. So I performed the McKenzie press-up, and my next thought was, okay, I need to stand and do the side glide to centralize the discs that I thought had bulged to the left, trapping the spinal nerve roots, which was in turn causing the symptoms down my leg via the sciatic nerve. Having coached many people with disc bulges how to centralize a posterior disc bulge, I knew how to get up from the ground without causing an issue. Using the technique I had taught many times, I managed to stand okay without worsening the symptoms. I then performed a left side glide, so I had my right side towards the wall, left hand on my left side of my pelvis. My feet were about 50 centimeters from the wall, and my right forearm was resting against the wall. I then pushed my pelvis towards the wall multiple times in an attempt to centralize the discs. So I performed the McKenzie push-up, followed by left side glides, and my symptoms were exactly the same. I was hoping these mobilizations would have improved the situation and I could go on with the rest of my day as usual, but with a little extra care and caution. So I performed the mobilizations again. Again, no difference in the symptoms. So I did one more set of each of the mobilizations, and again, the symptoms remained exactly the same. Realizing that doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result was not wise, I gave up on the mobilizations, and it was then it dawned on me that my injury was much worse than I'd originally realized and perhaps hoped. Several emotions then came over me. Possibly the strongest emotion at that point was embarrassment. Here I was, someone who had helped many people overcome lower back injuries, and the most common of those were disc herniations, and I was standing there suffering from that exact same injury. How could this have happened, I thought? Surely I should know better. I think looking back, I was being a bit hard on myself, and at that point, it was hard to imagine that the pain I was going through and about to go through for some time was one of the biggest blessings of my life. I was also experiencing fear, a lot of fear. Fear of not being able to work, fear of not being able to play tennis, fear of never getting back to lifting heavy weights in the gym, fear of not being able to do what was my favorite hobby at the time, DJing, and also fear of not getting back to Bikram yoga, which I really enjoyed. And I'll be speaking a little bit more about Bikram yoga a bit later. I was very fearful of not being able to do the things in life that brought me the most joy, but I also faced a potential crisis of identity. My whole identity revolved around being a practitioner, an athlete, an active and healthy person. What I was thinking at that time was, who would I become if I lost that identity? That was very concerning to me at that time. I then realized I needed to contact my clients I had scheduled to see that day, as it was clear I was not in any fit state to work. It was embarrassing having to tell my clients why I couldn't work that day. The next challenge I then faced was taking a shower and getting dressed. Just lifting up my leg to get in the shower had to be performed with very specific technique so as not to inflict shooting pains from the lower back all the way down my left leg. Standing upright wasn't a problem, but the slightest bending forwards of the spine or bending to the right sent the pain shooting along the sciatic nerve. The other thing I had was a dropped foot, so I couldn't dorsiflex the ankle. So dorsiflexion is when you lift your foot and toes upward towards the front of the knee. This made walking very difficult. I had to drag my left leg along the floor as I couldn't lift it from the ground due to the muscle weakness caused by the entrapped nerves. The next thing I realized was that it was impossible at that stage to put shoes or socks on. Because you have to have some degree of flexion or bending forwards of the lower back to reach your feet, this was simply not possible due to the pain it caused. Luckily, this event happened in June and the weather was warm, so I was able to wear Birkenstock sandals as I could just slip them on. Another thing that was impossible was sitting. It's amazing how we take something like sitting, that's something so simple, for granted. When you can't sit, life can become very challenging, especially if you want to rest. All these challenges I faced were also blessings. These challenges forced me to live through what my clients had to live through. I had to work out ways to get into the shower or put underwear on or put shoes on or put socks on, or just getting into a comfortable position to relax was a steep learning curve. I felt I learned more about lumbar spine pathology by going through the process than I did going through extensive training I received on spinal pathology. It made me much more empathetic when working with clients, more knowledgeable about the advice I was giving, more tricks up my sleeve, and ultimately a better practitioner. So I, at this point, wanted to confirm what I thought the injury was, so I arranged an emergency appointment with my GP that day so I could receive a referral for an MRI scan. I just wanted to know that it wasn't even more serious than I thought it was. Luckily, this injury didn't happen post-COVID, as I would probably have to wait a couple of years for an emergency GP appointment, but that's a whole nother story. I didn't have symptoms of a cauda equina, but I do know this condition requires emergency surgery to avoid serious long life complications. I just wanted to know for sure what I was dealing with. So I managed to secure an appointment with the GP, and then it dawned on me, I can't sit down, so I can't drive. I'll get a cab, I thought, and then half a millisecond later I realised that's not going to work either because I can't sit down. I couldn't even ask a friend or a family member to give me a lift. Not being able to do the simplest of things that we take for granted, like being able to get into a car, is extremely frustrating. So the only way to get there was via public transport, and the only feasible transport was via a bus. Now, I absolutely hate buses. In London, buses aren't exactly the most pleasurable experiences, often with drunks and drug addicts, the strong smell of urine, people with mental health issues freaking out, and violence sometimes breaking out as well. And that's just the good things about the buses. Catherine had always been fit and active when she suffered a debilitating back injury. She was barely able to get out of bed or walk without being in excruciating pain. She visited her GP, who prescribed anti-inflammatories, painkillers, and muscle relaxants, and also referred her to an orthopaedic consultant. Catherine was bedridden for 10 days and subsequently could only get through the day with large doses of the prescribed pills. Catherine was diagnosed with a prolapsed disc at L3-4, and she was offered anaesthetic injections or spinal surgery. She was horrified and concerned that she would have constant back problems for the rest of her life. Catherine was miserable, could hardly drive, a day at work was agony, and any movements in bed were very painful. I carried out detailed postural assessments, muscle strength tests, and analysis of her movement patterns. I identified the biomechanical problems and prescribed a very specific exercise program to correct her posture, reduce her level of pain, and to prevent the injury reoccurring. After 5 weeks on the program, the pain had reduced hugely in her back, and Catherine stopped taking painkillers. After 10 weeks, Catherine was back jogging and doing more intensive exercise with absolutely no back pain, and she was so pleased that she was able to pick up her young son again. If you're suffering like Catherine was, and you'd like to find out more about getting to the root cause of your back pain, go to www.bodycheck.co.uk and request a consultation. Now, back to the podcast. So I leave for the appointment and then realise how slowly I'm having to walk, dragging my left leg behind me as I go. For the first time in my life, I felt physically vulnerable. If someone at that point wanted to attack me, mug me, or whatever, I couldn't run away, and I didn't have any muscle strength to fight back. I was completely defenseless. It made me realise what it must feel like to be old and frail, and that feeling of vulnerability 24/7. It took several months of that feeling of vulnerability to go whenever I was outside. It was not a nice feeling. I finally get on the bus and I get to my appointment on time. I lost count of the amount of times people asked me to take a seat over the coming weeks and months and would get a strange look when I suggested, "It's okay, I'll stand, thank you." Ironically, the only place I could stand on the bus was reserved for disabled people in wheelchairs, which did make me chuckle. I arrive at the doctor's surgery, and after waiting in the waiting room long after my appointment was due, I was finally called into the GP's office. "Please sit down," he said. And then for the first time of many, I had to explain I was unable to sit down, which was met with a confused look on his face. "What can I do for you?" As he looked down at his notes. "Mr. Brandon," he said. He'd been my GP for over 40 years at this point, and he didn't know my name, which I guess suggests how infrequently I've been to my GP. I then went into a 2 to 3 minute explanation of the series of events, my symptoms, what I did for a living, and what I thought the causes were. He looked back at me as his eyes glazed over as if I was talking Chinese. "Well, it sounds like you know what you're talking about," he said. I made it clear that the main reason I was there was to obtain a referral for an MRI as quickly as possible. Now, what I haven't discussed up until this time is how the condition occurred. If I had £1 for every time someone asked me how did it happen, I would probably have a self-sufficient home/farm in England somewhere in the countryside as my main home, and a second home somewhere exotic, warm and sunny. Sadly, I didn't charge people for asking me that question. I must remember that next time. I found being asked that question quite interesting. And I say interesting because it's almost a conditioned response to think that if someone is in pain, it must be due to a one-off event. When I explained to people I woke up one morning and couldn't move and my back was stiff and painful with no clear cause, I tended to be met with confused looks as if they didn't believe it was possible. To be honest, in most situations, it would have taken too long to explain all the potential causes of the injury, so I tended to leave them with the briefest of answers. Of course, in certain situations, like this podcast episode, for instance, I do have the time to explain it in full. So I'm standing in my GP's office. I've asked for a referral for an MRI, and he says, "Well, it's clear to me that you know what you're talking about, but let me just examine you." He asked me to remove my t-shirt and he ran his fingers down my spine and said, "Yes, it all seems okay." Whatever that meant. I clearly wasn't okay. I think he may have been checking for a spondylolisthesis, which is a slippage of one vertebra on another, but maybe he just felt he needed to be seen to be doing something. He said, "I can arrange an MRI for you, but it will take 4 weeks." I was hoping for an MRI as soon as possible, like within 24 hours. I explained to him that I was due to fly to California in 4 weeks' time to discuss a book and a course that I had produced with Paul Chek. So the MRI needed to be sooner. He said, "Well, I could arrange for you to have one tomorrow, but that would be private and not on the NHS, and it would cost £440. I said that would be fine. He then said, "I'm going to write you a prescription for painkillers and anti-inflammatories." I told him not to write the prescription as I wouldn't be taking them. Again, he had a very confused look on his face. I suggested that I want to be able to feel the pain so I know when and if I'm moving into a position where I'm potentially causing more damage to the discs. We went back and forth for a while, with him saying that he needed to write the prescription as my doctor, and I kept suggesting he needn't write it as I wasn't going to take any medication. In the end, he said, "Look, I'm going to write it. It's up to you whether you take the medication or not, but as your doctor, I am advising you to." He gave me the prescription, and as I was turning to leave, he said, "Oh, by the way, you can't fly for 4 weeks." I told him I was going to fly, and again, we had a polite back and forth. And he said, "As your doctor, I'm advising you not to fly for 4 weeks." On my way out of his office, I noticed a waste paper bin where I dropped the prescription that he'd given me. So the next day, I needed to go to my local hospital to have an MRI of my lower back. I had to get 2 buses, along with a long walk in between the 2 buses, dragging my left leg behind me. It took a couple of hours to make the 7-mile journey, which would normally take about 20 minutes by car at that time of day. Getting in and out of the MRI machine was not exactly pain-free, but it wasn't too bad. After the scanning procedure was complete, I then had to make the arduous journey back via bus and on foot, well, mainly my right foot. I was told I would be sent the results of the scan, but no indication of when. Now, getting back to the causes of the injury, I need to explain to you what was going on in my life leading up to that point. For the previous 18 months to 2 years, in addition to seeing my clients in my practice in London and teaching courses at the Czech Institute, I was also writing a book. As I came closer to completing the book, which I hadn't agreed a contract for, I arranged to meet Paul Czech and his wife Penny in California to show them the book and to discuss the publication of the book and a training course to sit alongside the book. Once the date of this meeting had been set and put in my diary and the flights and accommodation booked, there was no turning back. I had to get the book completed prior to getting on the plane. So alongside coaching my clients, teaching the Czech courses, lifting weights, playing tennis, and attending Bikram yoga classes, I was filling almost every hour I had writing the book. This sometimes meant I'd be sitting down for 16 hours a day in an attempt to get the book completed. As the deadline time got ever nearer, my workouts were being sacrificed to create more time to work on the book. This meant more time seated and less time keeping my body fit and strong. So here is the first of the reasons I believe I injured my discs. The act of sitting places around 40 to 85% more compression on the lumbar discs as opposed to standing. The more slumped you sit, the more compression it puts through the discs. When you sit slumped, it places more pressure on the anterior part of the disc, which pushes the nucleus or the center of the disc posteriorly, which causes the outer part of the disc, known as the annulus fibrosus, to bulge outwards. If this continues over time, the annulus can begin to tear, and the nucleus can start to move in the direction of the tear in the annulus. If this continues over time, the bulge in the annulus can increase in size, potentially entrapping the nerve, which can, but not always, create the symptoms I was experiencing. If this continues further, the nucleus can eventually escape the annulus, causing an immune response, inflammation, and often greater symptoms of pain and numbness. As the deadline for the book got ever closer, I began to work even longer hours as I was spending more time working on the book. So now my sleep and recovery time was being reduced, so any damage to the discs wasn't being given adequate time to heal. So now not only was I probably causing more damage to the discs, but they had even less time to heal. All this was going on whilst I had absolutely no idea, as there were no symptoms at this stage. Another reason for the damage to the discs was undoubtedly the Bikram yoga classes. As much as I enjoyed the Bikram yoga classes and definitely felt the benefits of them, during the classes I did feel what I later described to a fellow classmate as my discs feel like they're popping out during the side bending pose. If you're not familiar with Bikram yoga, the classes are set in a studio where the temperature is set to around 41 degrees Celsius, so it's a very hot environment in which to exercise. The logic behind it is that as your body heats up, the tissues become more viscous and therefore stretch further, and you're able to increase your range of motion. The problem with this is that it can also allow you to move further than is ideal or safe for your body. In addition, the instructors in these classes are always encouraging you to force yourself to move further and further into the movements, assuming that moving further equals a better outcome. I do remember seeing another lady in class who was always complaining of back pain, yet there was no instruction from the teacher on how she should adjust the exercises so as not to make her pain worse. I could see in class that certain movements were hurting her, yet she just tried to soldier through. After a short while, I never saw that lady again. For me, the extreme side bending was the time it felt like my discs were popping out, but I have no doubt that the extreme forward bending and rotation of the spine during the classes would have also been creating microtrauma to the discs as well. It's also possible that 2 days before the onset of my back pain and the shooting pains and numbness in my leg, I performed heavy deadlifts in the gym. When performing deadlifts, particularly heavy deadlifts, you often posteriorly rotate the pelvis to tighten the sacroiliac and sacrotuberous ligaments to help stabilize the sacroiliac joint and pelvis. The posterior rotation of the pelvis also flattens the lumbar spine, which, like sitting with a slumped posture, increases the compression of the discs, pushing the nucleus of the disc posteriorly, and can cause trauma to the annulus fibrosus of the discs, causing disc bulges or worse, a herniation. Add the weight of the bar and the bending forward of the trunk, plus the rounded lower back posture, and this can place a huge amount of compression and therefore trauma to the disc. As I mentioned earlier, when I was performing the deadlifts, my right knee had a shooting pain going through it, and I did listen to my body at this point, and even though I wasn't very far into the workout, I made the wise decision to stop there. Something definitely just didn't feel right. I had previously damaged the anterior cruciate ligament in my right knee about 10 years prior, and perhaps the pain in my right knee was due to the central sensitization of the nervous system, due to the damage in my spine, but because the neural pathways were already hardwired from the knee pain, I felt pain in the knee, even though the knee wasn't damaged. I do feel had I taken the no pain, no gain approach to my workout that day, the injury may have been much worse, and perhaps the long-term consequences would have been much more serious. Another contributing factor to the prolapsed discs was my level of fatigue. I had been working very hard writing the book and the course, as well as a grueling teaching presenting schedule at the time, plus busy seeing clients. When the body is chronically fatigued, the adrenal glands often create an inhibitory effect on the psoas muscle in an attempt to cause the person to slow down and take some rest. The psoas muscle becomes weak or flaccid, which contributes to a flat lumbar spine, which again puts more stress on the discs and the supraspinous ligaments, increasing the likelihood of injury. 42-year-old Chris came to see me whilst training for his first marathon. Initially, Chris wanted manual therapy on his calf muscles, which were taking a pounding from his long runs. I did recommend to Chris several times that he really needed a full exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program so he could complete the marathon in the quickest time and to minimize his likelihood of injury. However, 6 weeks from his first race, Chris suffered a debilitating back injury that meant he was unable to walk and was devastated that all his hard work had gone down the drain. Chris hobbled into my treatment room the next day to see if we could salvage the situation. I suggested to Chris that he do what I recommended all along, and if he did, he'd probably have a 50% chance of completing the marathon. So I've gave Chris a full physical assessment and then devised a comprehensive exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program. And full credit to Chris, he gave it 100%, totally dedicating himself to the program. Days before the race, Chris came to see me for a final tune-up and to ask whether I thought he was ready for the race. I suggested he start the race, but to stop if he felt any back pain, as there will always be other races. I received a text message from Chris the afternoon of the race to say that he completed it in 3 hours 42 minutes and he had no pain and had little to no muscle soreness. Chris has since gone on to run multiple marathons in impressive times. So if you're suffering from back pain that's preventing you from doing something that you love, why not arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk so I can show you what's causing the problem and how you can get back to performing at your best. Now, back to the podcast. So the cause of my prolapsed discs from a physical biomechanical perspective was microtrauma over many years caused by a combination of playing tennis, a lot of time spent seated, extreme movements in Bikram yoga, and chronic fatigue, and the straw that broke the camel's back was the heavy deadlifts I performed 2 days before the onset of symptoms. But there is one more reason that isn't a physical causation. The region of the spine that was injured is located in the region of the second chakra. The second chakra relates to procreation, sexuality, sensuality, procreation, and rhythm and flow. It's also the chakra related to water. A river, for instance, has a rhythm and flow, as does the female menstrual cycle, which is also related to the second chakra. In my case, the rhythm and flow of my day was being seriously compromised by my desire to complete the book by the deadline that I'd set myself. Instead of there being a nice rhythm and flow to the day, it was more of a full-on slog with little time for movement, rest, and recovery. My schedule was simply too busy. Sometimes in life or at work, we need to suck it up and plow through. But we also need to dedicate adequate time and rest to recover before we go again. If we carry on burning candles at both ends and ignore the signs our body is giving us to slow down, our body will make sure we have to slow down by causing pain or disease. In my case, my injury made me slow down. I had no choice. I clearly hadn't listened to the warning signs. I was so focused on getting my project finished. What was also quite interesting was that the pain came on the day after I'd finished writing the first draft of the book. It was almost as if my subconscious mind knew that I had finished the task at hand, but now I had to listen to my body and slow down. So the next few days and weeks were a challenge, to say the least. I still couldn't sit, so I ordered myself a lumbar roll, and I was able to lie on my back with the lumbar roll under my lower back, or lay on my left side with the lumbar roll under the left side of my spine at the level of the belly button. The only other position I could get into whilst trying to rest was lying on my front with my forearms under my chest and my back in an extended position. These three positions, apart from standing, were the only comfortable positions that I could use. Putting my professional training into practice, I knew that I had to start rehabilitating myself with corrective exercises, corrective stretches, corrective strengthening, good hydration, good nutrition, and good rest and sleep. Over the next few weeks, I began a corrective exercise program. Whilst performing most of the exercises, I used what's called a neutralizer, which is a device invented by my good friend and friend of this podcast, Matt Walden, which is basically a stick with holes in it that you place along your spine, a string to tie around your waist, and a plastic screw. The neutralizer was extremely valuable to me during this early phase of rehabilitation. When you're in pain, the region around the pain loses its sense of feeling, or what we call proprioception. So it was very difficult for me to sense what position my lumbar spine was in at any particular time. I did feel it, however, when I moved into a position that increased the pain, which was normally flexion or side flexion to the right. What the neutralizer enabled me to do was to sense the position of my spine whilst exercising, and therefore able to maintain a neutral spine, which helped to not damage the discs further. And being in a neutral spine also enables better activation of the deep abdominal musculature. Another thing about pain is that it also inhibits muscles, the slow twitch muscle fibers in particular, that are innervated by the same nerves that are innervating any painful tissues. So the deep slow twitch fibers of my multifidus and deep abdominal wall muscles needed to be conditioned again to help stabilize the lumbar spine. Another benefit of using the neutralizer was that the string not only holds the stick in position on your spine, but when you tie it tightly, it's also a physical prompt to activate the deep abdominal muscles. So over the next few weeks, I performed stretches daily, stretching muscles that I knew were tight, and working on strengthening muscles that I knew were weak or inhibited. Over the weeks, the symptoms were improving, but very, very slowly. Having had quite a few muscle strains over the years playing sport, it generally took, just a few days to recover. And even though I was very aware that vertebral discs have very little blood supply and therefore the healing process is slow, it was sometimes very frustrating, and the seeds of doubt sometimes crept in as to whether I would make a full recovery. I had to keep reminding myself that I would fully recover, but I just had to be patient. I did also have a deep belief that I would recover. So it came to the day that I was due to fly to San Diego, and I still hadn't managed to sit down at all. I'd ordered the taxi to take me to the airport, but I had no idea whether I would actually be able to get in it. It turns out I did manage to get in the taxi, albeit very painfully, but with my lumbar roll placed carefully on the seat, once I was sat in the car, I was pretty comfortable, apart from going over bumps in the road, which were pretty painful. So I arrive at the airport, and now I start psyching myself up for an 11-hour flight from Heathrow to LAX. After finding my seat on the plane and very gingerly placing my lumbar roll on the seat and contorted my body into position without too much pain, once I was sat down, I actually felt quite comfortable. To my surprise, the flight was reasonably comfortable, apart from some bouts of cramp in my left leg, which is another symptom of sciatica, which plagued me for a couple of years, especially whilst sleeping. 5 movies later, I arrive at LAX airport, and I caught a short flight from LAX to Carlsbad airport. I get handed my luggage as I exit the plane and pick up my keys to my hire car for the next week or so. So now I'm feeling anxious as to whether I'll be able to drive, but I guess there was only one way to find out. For sure, if it had a manual gearbox, it would have been impossible for me to drive. But as always, the car was an automatic, and to my surprise, once I was in the car with my trusty lumbar roll in position, driving was quite comfortable. The main issue was getting in and out of the car, as it was always involved a degree of lumbar flexion. The next day, I drove to the Heaven House, where Paul Check's office was back then, and I clearly remember Paul had a meeting with his staff that day, and I waited patiently for the meeting to finish for about an hour or so, and the whole time I lay on the floor with my forearms under my chest and my lower back in an extended position, which was the only comfortable position I could get into. The meeting with Paul and Penny went really well, and I then joined them for lunch afterwards, lovingly cooked by Vidya, Paul's assistant at the time. A couple of days later, I was back at the Heaven House with Paul and the rest of the Czech faculty for meetings, and each day we went through procedures to set us up for the day. We did Native American drumming a few times, and each time we did it, I noticed the pain in my back reduced as we were drumming. In fact, I was amazed that I could hold a drum in one hand for so long without it causing any worsening of my symptoms. That's the power of music and healing vibrations and doing something that you love to do. I do love Native American drumming, especially with a group of people such as the Czech faculty. Each session was an awesome experience. After returning from my overseas trip and 8 weeks from the onset of the original pain, I upgraded my exercise program. I was also going to see my friend and colleague Phil Lazides for manual therapy, and whilst there's not much you can do to help healing a disc with manual therapy, I certainly always felt better after having some of my muscle tightness released. I also continued to focus on getting to bed early, as well as good hydration and nutrition. 5 months later, I started to see a speeding up of the healing to the point where I could sense improvement each day, and I could move my spine with much more range of motion without pain, and the numbness had gone from my leg, and just my big toe was still permanently numb. At this stage, the amount of weight I was able to lift safely was increasing. I began loading the spine with exercises in the gym, such as front squats, but I wasn't yet able to play tennis or go back to yoga. Almost 18 months after the initial onset of the pain, I managed a whole month without cramping my left leg, waking me up at night, which was great. Over the previous 17 months or so, I had carried out corrective exercises 4 to 6 times per week that focused on improving posture and strengthening the muscles that help to stabilize the spine. In particular, I worked on strengthening my lumbar erector muscles to take the pressure off my discs and my lumbar multifidus muscles to help stabilize the spine. After a few months, I introduced exercises to help increase muscle mass and to help get me ready to return to tennis. I completely avoided yoga and have never returned to it to this day. I also ensured that I sat with good posture at all times, especially when driving. I have ensured I get to bed on time, generally before 10 p.m. at least 6 days per week, to maximize the tissue healing. I've spent more time relaxing and meditating, again to aid recovery. I've eaten a fully organic diet and stayed well hydrated to ensure that my tissues have all the nutrients they need to rebuild stronger than ever. I've not taken any medication, no painkillers, no anti-inflammatories, and I have not had any medical intervention or surgery. 22 months after the initial onset of the lower back symptoms, my rehabilitation was fully complete. 4 months earlier, I had been training with no restrictions and had been performing Olympic lifting at high speed. The strength in my lower back muscles had improved, and I was approaching the pre-injury strength levels in my squats without any spasm of lower back muscles. Only my schedule had prevented me from getting on the tennis court, although I did get on court once whilst I was in San Diego. And that summer, I did manage to play the whole season of tennis. So I went from 2 prolapse discs to Olympic lifting and playing tennis without any medical intervention or surgery, by understanding what caused the injury in the first place and doing the opposite, and by applying basic biomechanical knowledge alongside holistic healing. Now at the age of 54, 10 years on from the biggest injury in my life, I'm squatting weights close to my personal bests, which was set when I was 27 years old, playing tennis better than ever, and I have less aches and pains that I've had in decades. I also pay close attention to what work projects I take on and ensure that I give myself gaps between projects, as well as looking after myself from day to day. I really hope this episode can help inspire those who have a serious back injury that you can heal. You can get back to normal. You just need to follow certain steps, listen to your body, learn what the pain teacher is trying to tell you, and stay patient with the process because it can be a long road. And to get help from people who know what they're doing and potentially have been through that hero's journey themselves. From my experience of back pain and through seeing clients that come to me for help, it's clear that one of the worst things in life is not being physically capable to do the things you love to do in life, whether it be picking up your kids, playing sport, earning a living, or just the more simple things we take for granted, like sitting down, getting dressed, brushing your hair, or getting in and out of a car. My experience also showed me that there's nearly always a way out of your pain, and it's important not to allow any psychological barriers to get in the way of you returning to the life that you really want to live, and to be prepared to reach out for help and follow the advice you're given. The alternative is to live a life of pain, sadness, frustration, depression, and a lack of fulfillment, and we all deserve more than that. So that's all from me for this week, but don't forget you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.